Have you ever watched someone destroy their own career because they couldn't stand the idea of treating people with basic respect? Because that's exactly what happened to my former manager, and the crazy part is, he did it to himself. For years, I was the employee everybody counted on. The one they called when someone quit without notice, when someone called in sick, when the store was drowning during the holiday rush. Then one guy walked in thinking he could use that loyalty like a weapon. 6 months later, he was gone. Nobody would tell us where he went, and honestly, I think I know why. Back in 2021, I was working at a large grocery store outside Columbus, Ohio. Nothing glamorous, just one of those places where everybody knows everybody, customers come in 3 times a week, and the employees end up spending more time together than they do with their own families. I'd been in retail for over 2 decades by then. 20 plus years of dealing with angry customers, holiday madness, inventory disasters, and every type of manager you could imagine. The good ones, the terrible ones, and the dangerous ones. The dangerous managers aren't the ones who scream. They're the ones who smile while taking advantage of you. At the store, people called me the fixer. Not officially, of course. That wasn't on my name tag, but if something went wrong, somebody eventually found me. Need someone to cover a shift. Call Natalie, need someone to stay late, call Natalie. Need someone to train a new cashier, call Natalie. Need someone to calm down a customer threatening to call corporate. Yep, Natalie again. Part of it was because I knew the job. The other part was because I genuinely cared. I liked helping people, maybe too much. My husband, Mark, used to joke about it all the time. You know they're taking advantage of you, right? I'd laugh and say, probably. Then I'd go cover another shift. For years, things worked reasonably well. The front-end manager before all this was a woman named Linda. Linda wasn't perfect, but she respected people. If she asked you for a favor, she'd remember it later. If you stayed late one night, she'd try to help you out another day. Simple stuff, mutual respect. Then Linda had her second child and stepped down from management. That's when everything changed. A month later, they brought in a new front-end manager. His name was Bryce. And from the first week, something felt off. You know how some people walk into a room and immediately act like they're the smartest person there? That was Bryce, mid-30s, perfect haircut, expensive watch, always talking about leadership books and management strategies, the kind of guy who loved hearing himself talk. The first real interaction I had with him happened during a staff meeting. He stood in front of everybody and said, "I believe in accountability, I believe in excellence. I believe every employee should be willing to go above and beyond whenever necessary." A few people nodded. I remember looking around the room thinking, that sounds nice. Let's see how long it lasts. Turns out what Bryce meant by going above and beyond was everyone doing extra work while he took credit for it. The first few months weren't terrible, annoying, sure, but manageable. Then I had a medical procedure, nothing life-threatening, just outpatient vein surgery on my leg. The doctor told me I'd need several days to recover. I scheduled everything properly. Used my vacation time, got approval weeks in advance. Everything was documented. The day before I was scheduled to return, Bryce called me. "Hey Natalie, any chance you could work tomorrow morning?" I asked. "Who's closing tomorrow night?" There was a pause, then he changed the subject. I asked again. "Seriously, who's closing?" Another vague answer. Third time, same thing. Eventually, I figured they had someone lined up. Why else would he avoid answering? So I agreed to work the morning shift. The next day, halfway through my shift, Bryce walked over, that smug little grin already on his face. "Quick question," he said. I already knew I wasn't going to like it. "What's up?" "We don't actually have anyone closing tonight." I stared at him. For a second, I thought he was joking. He wasn't. "I need you to go home for a few hours and then come back tonight." I blinked. "Bryce, I just had surgery." "You're here now?" "Yeah, for 4 hours." He shrugged. "I need coverage." There it was, not a request, not a favor, an expectation. I explained that I had plans with my husband, that my leg was already hurting, that I'd specifically asked about coverage 3 times the day before. Bryce's smile disappeared. The look he gave me was the same look customers give when they realize they're not getting their way. Oh, just one word, but I knew exactly what it meant. The answer wasn't acceptable. I said no anyway, and from that day forward, everything changed. The following week, Bryce suddenly became impossible to work with. If I said good morning, he'd ignore me. If I asked a question, he'd answer with one-word responses. If a customer issue took 30 seconds longer than normal, he'd criticize me in front of everyone. Subtle stuff, petty stuff. The kind of behavior designed to make you uncomfortable without being obvious enough to report. Then came strike number 2. A few weeks later, I had a follow-up appointment with my surgeon. Again, Bryce asked if I could come in early. Again, I told him no, and again he gave me that stare. If you've worked retail, you know exactly the stare I'm talking about. The manager stare, the one that's supposed to make you cave, the one that says, "I'm in charge." Unfortunately for Bryce, I'd spent 20 years dealing with angry customers. One middle manager wasn't exactly intimidating. I smiled. Finished my conversation and walked away. That afternoon after my appointment, I arrived at work and noticed several district executives touring the store, corporate visitors. Everybody was on their best behavior. Bryce spotted me immediately. His face lit up, not because he was happy to see me, because he thought he'd found an opportunity. He raised his voice loud enough for the executives nearby to hear. "Well, look who finally showed up." I turned around. Bryce continued. "I was going to call you in earlier, but we didn't need you after all." The implication was obvious. He wanted everyone around us to think I'd been unavailable, uncooperative, maybe even lazy. For a second, the entire front end went quiet. Cashiers stopped scanning. Customers glanced over. Bryce folded his arms, waiting, expecting embarrassment, expecting me to stay quiet. Instead, I smiled, a slow smile, the kind that usually means trouble. Then I said, "That's great." Because I wouldn't have come in anyway. I had a doctor's appointment. The silence that followed was beautiful. I watched one of the district executives glance toward Bryce, then toward me, then back toward Bryce, and for the first time, I saw something crack behind his confident expression. That was the moment I realized this wasn't about scheduling anymore. Bryce wasn't frustrated because I refused to help. Bryce was frustrated because I refused to obey, and once I understood that, everything started making a lot more sense. Once I realized Bryce's problem wasn't about staffing but control, I started looking back at all our interactions through a different lens, and suddenly every little thing made sense. He wasn't interested in building a strong team. He wasn't interested in developing employees. What he wanted was something much simpler. He wanted people who would say yes, people who wouldn't ask questions, people who wouldn't push back. The problem for Bryce was that after 20 plus years in retail, I had learned something important. Managers come and go, district managers come and go, store directors come and go, but your self-respect has to stay with you, and once you start giving that away, it becomes very hard to get back. Around that time, an opportunity opened up at the customer service desk. Now, for anyone who's never worked in a grocery store, the customer service desk is kind of the nerve center of the entire front end. Returns, money orders, lottery tickets, customer complaints, Western Union transactions, price corrections, all the complicated stuff flows through that area. It also paid more, not a fortune, but enough to matter. At that point, I was already doing half the work anyway. Whenever customer service got backed up, people called me. Whenever a new employee needed training, people called me. Whenever somebody needed help with overrides or complicated transactions, people called me. I wasn't officially in the role, I was just doing the work. So one afternoon I approached Bryce. "Hey, I heard there's an opening at customer service." "There is. I'd like to apply." He smiled, not a real smile, one of those management smiles, the kind that sounds like a yes but somehow never becomes one. "Absolutely, you're doing great. Let me look into it." Simple enough, or so I thought. A week passed, nothing, then another, still nothing. Then one morning I walked in and saw a new employee training behind the customer service counter, a girl I'd personally trained as a cashier. I stared for a second. Maybe there were multiple openings. Maybe mine was still coming. A few days later, another employee got promoted. Then another. People who had worked there less than a year. People who routinely came to me for help. Meanwhile, I was still standing at register 7, still doing all the extra responsibilities, still making cashier pay. One afternoon, my friend Erica pulled me aside during break. "You know what's going on, right?" I looked at her. "What?" She lowered her voice. "If Bryce promotes you, he has to pay you more." I laughed, not because it was funny, because it was probably true. The more I thought about it, the more obvious it became. Why would he give me a raise when I was already doing the work for free? Every extra responsibility I handled saved him effort. Every problem I solved made him look good. Promoting me would only cost him money. And for the first time, I started feeling something dangerous. Not anger, disappointment. Anger burns hot. Disappointment settles in your chest and stays there because disappointment means you expected better. I stopped volunteering for quite as much. Stopped staying late quite as often. Not out of spite, out of exhaustion. Then came the moment that pushed everything over the edge. There was an opening in the seafood department. Now this might sound random, but I was actually excited about it. The seafood manager, a woman named Diane, had a fantastic reputation. People loved working for her. She treated employees like adults. She worked around school schedules. She actually listened. Basically, she was everything Bryce wasn't. One afternoon, I stopped by her department. We talked for nearly 30 minutes. By the end of the conversation, she was smiling. "I'd love to have you over here." I felt hopeful for the first time in months. The hours would fit my college schedule. The pay was slightly better. Most importantly, I'd finally be out from under Bryce. There was just one final step, getting approval, and unfortunately that meant talking to him. The next day I approached Bryce in his office. I spoke with Diane. "She's interested in transferring me to seafood." Immediately his expression changed, not dramatically, just enough, a tiny flicker, a tiny tightening around the eyes. The first excuse came instantly. "We might be shorthanded up front." I answered it. Then came another. "We're evaluating staffing needs." I answered that one too, then another, and another. Every concern he raised already had a solution. Eventually the conversation became almost absurd. It felt less like a discussion and more like a man desperately searching for reasons to say no. At one point he even claimed another employee was already transferring. The funny thing was, I'd already spoken to that employee. She had no idea what he was talking about. The entire conversation felt off, but I left hoping things would eventually work themselves out. They didn't. 3 weeks passed, then 4, then 5, nothing, no paperwork, no transfer, no updates. Every time I asked, Bryce had a new excuse. One afternoon, Diane actually stopped me in the break room. "What's going on? What do you mean?" I submitted everything. My stomach dropped. "What? The transfer request?" I stared at her. "You did, weeks ago." For a moment, neither of us said anything. Then she sighed. Oh, she had figured it out at the exact same time I did. Bryce wasn't delaying the process. He was blocking it completely. A few days later, I learned they'd hired an entirely new employee for seafood. Somebody from outside the company, a complete stranger. That one hurt, not because I desperately wanted seafood, but because it confirmed everything. Bryce wasn't trying to help the business. He wasn't trying to put people where they would succeed. He was protecting his own convenience. I confronted him the next day, not in front of customers, not in front of staff, just the two of us. His office door closed. The hum of fluorescent lights overhead. I remember every second of that conversation. "Did you block my transfer?" He looked up from his computer. "No, you hired someone else." We made the decision that was best for the store, I laughed. That caught him off guard. You mean best for you? His face hardened. For the first time, neither of us was pretending anymore. The professional masks came off. The room felt smaller, tighter. Finally, Bryce leaned back in his chair and said the sentence that changed everything. Natalie, maybe you should stop worrying about other positions and just do your job. Just do your job, that's all he said, 6 simple words. But the second they left his mouth, something clicked in my brain because for years I'd been doing far more than my job, and suddenly I realized something. Bryce had become completely dependent on that. He expected it, counted on it, built his entire operation around it. Without even realizing it, he'd created a system that only worked because people like me constantly went above and beyond. And now he was telling me to stop thinking about advancement, stop thinking about growth, stop thinking about opportunities, and just do my job. I smiled, a genuine smile, the first genuine smile I'd had in months. Bryce mistook it for surrender. I could see it in his face. He thought he'd won. He thought the conversation was over. He thought I was finally falling in line. You're right, I said calmly, his shoulders relaxed. Good, I stood up, grabbed the office door, and looked back one final time. From now on, Bryce, I'll do exactly my job. He nodded without even looking up. That's what I've been asking for. I walked out of that office feeling lighter than I had in months, not because I had accepted defeat, because I had finally stopped fighting the wrong battle. You see, Bryce thought he was denying me opportunities. What he didn't understand was that he had just given me permission. Permission to stop carrying responsibilities that never belonged to me in the first place. And the really funny part, the consequences started less than 24 hours later. Because the next morning, the first person who needed an override came looking for me, and for the first time in years, I said no. The next morning started like any other shift. The automatic doors slid open, customers rolled carts across the tile floor, and somewhere in the distance a toddler was already crying because he couldn't have candy before breakfast. Normal grocery store chaos, but for me something had changed. A cashier from Register 3 waved me over. Hey Natalie, can you do an override for me? For years my response would have been automatic. Sure, no problem, be right there. Instead I smiled. I'm sorry, I'm not authorized to do overrides. She blinked. What? I'm just doing my job. At first she thought I was joking, then she realized I wasn't. 5 minutes later another employee approached. Can you grab change for my register? No. Why not? Not part of my position. 10 minutes later someone needed help at self-checkout, then somebody needed assistance behind customer service. Then another cashier needed a manager code. Each time I gave the same answer, polite, professional, friendly, and absolutely infuriating. I'm sorry, that's above my pay grade. The reactions were priceless. People weren't angry at me. Most of them understood immediately. A few even started laughing because everyone knew exactly what was happening, everyone except Bryce. At first, by lunchtime the front end looked like a small disaster zone. Managers were running in circles, lines were backing up, customer service was overwhelmed. Problems that I normally solved in seconds suddenly required actual supervisors. For the first time in months, Bryce had to do his own job, and he hated every second of it. A few days later, he cornered me near the break room. What exactly are you doing? I looked genuinely confused. What do you mean? You know what I mean. No, I don't. His jaw tightened. You're refusing to help. I shook my head. I'm doing exactly what you told me. The silence that followed was beautiful. For a second, I thought steam might actually come out of his ears. Then came the threat. I can write you up. I almost laughed. For what? His mouth opened, then closed, because we both knew the answer. He couldn't write me up for performing my actual job description. The conversation ended right there. For the next several weeks, Bryce became increasingly miserable. The funny thing was I wasn't sabotaging anything. I wasn't breaking rules. I wasn't creating problems. I had simply stopped solving everyone else's, and that difference mattered a lot. It's amazing how quickly a system falls apart when the unpaid extra work disappears. Around that same time, I started looking for another job, not because of Bryce, not entirely. The truth is he helped me realize something important. I had become comfortable being undervalued, comfortable being the dependable employee everyone relied on but nobody rewarded, comfortable accepting less than I deserved. Once you see that clearly, it's impossible to unsee. 3 months later, I got an offer from a medical supply company. Better hours, better benefits, better pay, no weekends. I accepted immediately. The day I handed in my resignation, Bryce looked genuinely shocked, almost offended, as if the idea had never crossed his mind. He stared at the paper, then looked up. You need to give 2 weeks, I shrugged. I gave 10 days. Company policy is 2 weeks. I couldn't help smiling. Really? Yes, I leaned against the desk. Would the company give me 2 weeks if they were firing me? His expression darkened. That's different. No, Bryce, it's exactly the same. Neither of us said anything for a moment, then I walked away. The final days were glorious, not dramatic, not explosive, just glorious. Every time the phone rang asking me to come in on my day off. No, every time someone asked me to stay late. No, every time Bryce needed a last-minute miracle. No. The thing about being the reliable employee is people slowly stop noticing how much you're doing. Until you stop doing it, then suddenly everyone notices. Schedules became harder to fill, coverage became harder to find, problems took longer to solve, and Bryce looked more stressed every single day. On my last afternoon, I finished my shift, clocked out, and started saying goodbye. Cashiers hugged me, a few customers wished me luck. One employee actually whispered, "You're escaping." I laughed. Something like that. As I walked toward the exit, Bryce was standing near customer service. Watching, neither of us said anything. I simply waved, not a sarcastic wave, not an angry wave, just a goodbye. Then I walked out the front doors. The sunlight hit my face, and for the first time in over a year I felt completely free. Most people would assume that's where the story ends. It isn't, not even close. A few weeks after starting my new job, I met a former coworker for coffee. We spent nearly 2 hours talking. Eventually, the conversation drifted toward Bryce. Apparently, morale was worse than ever. People were quitting, employees were frustrated, several workers had already filed complaints. That's when my friend asked a question. Have you ever reported him? I hadn't, at least not officially. The idea stayed with me for days, then weeks. The more I thought about it, the more I realized something. Bryce's behavior hadn't only affected me. He treated dozens of employees the same way, maybe not identically, but close enough. And most of them were too afraid to speak up, so I started gathering information, nothing dishonest, nothing exaggerated, just facts, dates, conversations, incidents. Former coworkers willingly shared their experiences. I documented everything carefully. An employee denied opportunities, a transfer blocked, repeated intimidation, public humiliation, retaliation, patterns started emerging. And the bigger the file became, the uglier the picture looked. Eventually, I sent everything to the district manager, every page, every detail, every example. Then I remembered something else. Customer surveys, every grocery receipt included a survey. Management loved those surveys. Corporate loved them even more. The comments went everywhere. Store leadership, district leadership, regional leadership, everyone saw them. So every time I visited the store as a customer, I filled one out. Not fake complaints, not exaggerations, just truthful observations, again and again, professional, specific, documented, consistent. Months passed, then one day I stopped by to buy groceries. Something immediately felt different. The atmosphere was lighter, employees seemed happier, people were smiling again. I walked over to one of my old coworkers. Where's Bryce? She grinned. You didn't hear? Hear what? He's gone, just like that. Gone, no announcement, no farewell, no explanation. A new front-end manager had already taken over. I never learned exactly what happened. Maybe he resigned, maybe he was transferred, maybe corporate finally connected the dots. Honestly, it didn't matter because the ending wasn't really about Bryce. It was about a lesson I wish I had learned years earlier. Being dependable is valuable, being hardworking is valuable, being loyal is valuable. But none of those things mean you should allow people to exploit you. The moment someone starts treating your extra effort as an obligation instead of a gift, something is broken. And if you keep accepting it, they'll keep taking. Looking back now, I don't feel anger toward Bryce anymore. Mostly I feel gratitude, because without him, I might have stayed stuck in that job for another decade. I might never have realized my worth. I might never have left. Still, every now and then, I wonder what happened after he disappeared. Did he finally understand why people stopped supporting him? Did he ever realize that leadership isn't about authority, it's about trust? Or does he still think everyone else was the problem? And honestly, that's the question I want to leave with you. Do you think Bryce got what he deserved, or do you think I went too far by reporting him after I left? If you've ever had a boss like Bryce, what would you have done in my position? Let me know in the comments below, because stories like this always spark debate, and sometimes the most interesting part isn't the revenge. It's deciding where justice ends and revenge begins.